Welcome to A Cult of Personality, esoteric podcast extraordinaire at occultofpersonality.net. I'm your host, Greg Kaminsky. A Cult of Personality podcast is also available on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher Radio, and all the best podcast channels and apps. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to get all the latest updates on new episodes and much more. This is episode 163, featuring an interview with Robert Johnson and Frater O from the Whence Came You podcast. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to the A Cult of Personality membership section. This episode is also made possible by additional donations from Steve, Lance, Ron, John, Jeff, Adrian, and Andrew via the donate button at occultofpersonality.net, and Craig and others who support the show via the Occult of Personality Patreon campaign, available at patreon.com/occult of personality. I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, the costs for me to bring it to you are significant. I need your financial support now more than ever. If you're willing, consider supporting A Cult of Personality by joining the membership section or donating via the donate button on the occultofpersonality.net website, or via Patreon at patreon.com/occultofpersonality. If you find these interviews interesting, informative, inspiring, and thought-provoking, please commit to helping me continue bringing you this podcast. And if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you. A Cult of Personality podcast is also sponsored by Miskatonic Books, an online store that focuses on the esoteric, occult, ceremonial magic, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, witchcraft, the Golden Dawn, as well as dark fantasy, classic horror, and supernatural fiction. They carry books by all your favorite esoteric publishers as well. Just visit miskatonicbooks.com. Temple of Thelema is a true outer order of the greater mysteries, providing ceremonial initiation, structured training, and regular group work, all in conformity with the principles of the Book of the Law. An investment of time, effort, and commitment is expected from each member. Each is expected to aspire fervently to the great work, to dare, with courage undaunted, to perfect that work, and ever to apply his or her best effort to effect harmony within the order and within the world in general. Founded in service to the AA, College of Thelema seeks to guide the student to an understanding of the law of Thelema. Most especially, this means a deeper understanding of oneself and of one's true will. A combination of instruction techniques is employed, including seminars, written texts, and individual work. For over 40 years, College of Thelema has published journals in the Continuum and Black Pearl, as well as several books on occult subjects maintaining high standards in Thelemic education. Visit Temple of Thelema at www.thelema.org. The Hermetic Arts Learning Center, located in historic Salem, Massachusetts, offers unique instruction in the arcane arts from some of the most experienced and talented teachers around. The Hermetic Arts Learning Center is committed to the authentic Western esoteric tradition by providing students with quality, in-depth classes along with all the books and ritual tools one could ever want, many of them handcrafted. The ancient mysteries have a new home in the Witch City. Stop by the shop or visit online at hermeticarts.com. Now, in episode number 163, an interview with Robert Johnson and Frater O of the Whence Came You podcast, perhaps the premier Masonic podcast that's dedicated to providing light to Freemasons and men interested in Freemasonry. You can find their website at www.wcypodcast.com. Brother Robert H. Johnson is the host, producer, and writer for the Whence Came You podcast, and Frater O is the co-host as well as the esoteric and spiritual advisor. In this interview, we discuss not only the origins of the Whence Came You podcast, but RJ and Frater O's interest in esoterica and Freemasonry. We also spend a considerable portion of the conversation discussing the recent controversial state Grand Lodge decisions to expel Freemasons for homosexuality in one case and for pagan beliefs in another, as well as the idea of equality within Freemasonry more generally. Robert Johnson and Frater O from the Whence Came You podcast, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I've been a fan of your show for some time now. But before we talk about your podcast, maybe we could talk a little bit about each of you individually and your interest in esotericism and Freemasonry more specifically. Cool. Robert, why don't we start with you?
So as far as esoteric stuff goes, that was kind of my general interest in the fraternity in the beginning. I received a book from a friend of mine named Yukitaro Hamada, who is a Japanese artist, and he handed me a book of Masonic tapestries, and it was really interesting, kind of piqued my interest. I saw a lot of the symbolism and some really interesting things. Very interested in occult studies and things like that before I became a Mason, and I guess it was a surface interest. So I was going to try to join the Masonic fraternity, and I was living in Orange, California, and I totally wussed out. I didn't join. I kind of got freaked out because there was a plaque on the wall on the outside of the building that basically said when they were there and what to do, and it just kind of freaked me out. So I waited, and then a few years later, I finally joined, and did not find exactly what I thought I would find at the beginning, and so I kind of looked around and found some really interesting texts, found some really cool podcasts out there. Of course, we had, at that time, there was the Digital Freemason, and he would touch on some interesting symbolic aspects, and that was really my first intro to kind of the occult and symbolism and just those basic little things and symbols that we learn about in the craft. But you know, the funny part is I didn't learn any of that when I was in my lodge, really, outside of just the typical lectures that they give. And of course, Scott Blaskin, he's up in Canada, and he did his show again called The Digital Freemason. And it was a great little show, 10, 15 minutes here or there, and I would just always listen to it. And I remember him talking about, different symbols and what they could mean, and reading these short esoteric papers, and sometimes not esoteric, but it really got me to venture into explore deeper aspects. I kind of dove into some other texts, and it was like 2009, I want to say, maybe 2008. I was 2009. I started reading. I read a book. It was like an introduction to the Zohar, And in the introduction of the book, of course, I did not necessarily heed warnings, right? I mean, there are these ancient warnings about reading the Zohar that you have to basically have a family, you've got to be well established, you've got to have a good sound mind and a full belly, all these things, these symbolic meanings. And of course, I didn't do any of those things, and I was not the proper age to begin anything like that. And I started noticing weird things, like kind of perception as far as, kind of day-to-day life and living, and perception changes and odd things. And I had a huge bout of something I'd never experienced before, which was like anxiety and panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of felt like maybe there was something to the warning, right? I mean, the way a lot of the text reads and the deep, deep thoughts contained within it kind of maybe switched something on. And then I kind of started backing off. And I started really reading into a lot of other symbols, and started listening to different podcasts, yours included. Tremendous asset to anybody out there who likes occultism and just in general study of knowledge and things that are secret. And that's kind of my interest, really, is just grown from there. And every time I hear something new or you read some new tidbit, you dive in, and there's 10 more layers of very interesting materials. I think my favorite book, Masonic anyway, is nothing life-changing, but it's certainly a very interesting book, was Symbology by Milton A. Pottinger. It's just such an interesting book in the way there's a preface inside the book where there's a kind of a story, and it talks about meeting somebody, and then that person disappears, and it's just kind of an interesting way of looking at things and the way things are described. And I don't know, man, it's just a fascination with the unknown.
The mystery kind of draws you in.
Yeah, the mystery definitely draws you in. We're talking about, the age-old questions that we all have. Why are we here? What are we? Are we just these things living in these machines that walk around? And where do we go when we're done? What did they know before that we don't know now? All of these things just intrigue me. I have a huge fascination with the Tetragrammaton. Just all kinds of wild stuff. And of course, sometime around 2010, 2011, I started talking with Frater O, and we hit it off, and he gave me so many resources, and I just dove in. And so that's where I am today, just day by day, mystery by mystery, and trying to pull the red thread.
Nice. Well, Frater O is certainly a wealth of wisdom in many respects. So, Frater O, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Wow. Thanks for those kind words. Robert, has it really been since that long? Geez, time flies.
It does. Yeah, you called me and we talked about my anxiety attacks, and you gave me sweet meditations to do. And let me tell you, man, that's really what pulled me out of a lot of stuff. So I owe you a lot, buddy.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to hear it did. Yeah, it definitely pulled you out. So the question originally, so I just want to digress for a second, was about how did I get started into esoterics, correct?
Yeah, and Freemasonry as well.
So, I was really fortunate. I've been prevalent through Freemasonry, and my family have been around it, always saw the rings, and I never asked the questions, but I always knew it was something greater and something very powerful. I just never asked why until I was living in California, and I was talking with someone who was a really close friend who was more of a grandfather figure to me, and he got me kind of involved into Masonry in California, and this was back in 2007. And got my entered apprentice, and then I took the degree to heart and just kind of pulled myself away and learned to literally take those lessons that were presented and apply